Let's imagine a future web in which all that you have to do to learn the name of the author of a piece of text is hover your pointer over their words. Or imagine that for images, right? Usually with writing that we find online, the author's name is up at the top or it's down at the bottom. It's not that hard to find. But what about for images? Imagine if that all you had to do to find the name of a photographer or the name of an artist or something was to hover your pointer over the picture. Wouldn't that be great? I think so. Imagine if all that you had to do to find the original context of a quotation was to just click on the quotation and say, show me the original context. Imagine if, in addition to being able to, quote and share things online, we were all at liberty to mix things up, mash them up into new compositions, new presentations, new sort of derivative works, knowing that all the media fragments that we use to do that would remain sort of intrinsically connected to their sources, so that if anyone wanted to, they could peel those things apart, peel away the layers, and easily, effortlessly find out the origins of all of those things. And imagine a web in which, you find something interesting online and you want to know more about it and where it came from. You can right-click on it and just say, where have you been republished online? Or what links to you? And actually get an answer. Wouldn't that be fabulous? What I'm describing here is the promise of Xanadu. Xanadu was always intended to be this hypermedia system of sort of deep, persistent connections where it was effortlessly easy for readers and viewers to find out where stuff came from. And more than that, it was a system for artists and authors and academics and fans and critics and curators to not just share stuff, but make new stuff out of stuff that already existed, but in this kind of ethical way where connection to source always persists and people can find out where stuff came from. All this great stuff is facilitated by a system built around transclusion. And in the ELF-flavored version of this, sort of a ubiquitous queryable metadata system. We'll come back around to that. For now, let's talk about transclusion. When you're shown a document and it appears to be one whole coherent singular thing, but it's actually been assembled on the fly from a bunch of different pieces at different network locations, that's transclusion. When you look at a web page and it has images in it, those images aren't in the HTML file. There's a little code in there, a little image tag that says, hey, there's an image resource out on the network here. Go grab that and then stick it in the layout and make it look like it's a part of this document. That's transclusion. So even if you don't know the word, you're familiar with the concept. We run into transclusion all the time because audiovisual media on the web is, by and large, transcluded. There are ways you can get around that. You can use data URIs in HTML. You can have audiovisual stuff that's generated on the fly by JavaScript. But for the most part, the overwhelming majority of audiovisual media that we run into online is transcluded, but not text. And xanalogical hypertext is all about text transclusion. Let's take a look at a plain text resource. I've already got the URL for one in the clipboard, so I'll just pop it into the loader here. And I just found this on on textfiles.com last night. And I think the young author did pretty well with this one. Etheron or Atheron, however they prefer to pronounce that. They did a good job with evoking the sort of the feel of early 20th century avant-garde manifesto. Anyway, enough about the text itself. What we need to get in our heads here is that what we're looking at here is not the resource. That's not the plain text resource. What we're looking at is a view of this plain text resource. Hypothetically, we could have many views of this same resource available or showing in the workspace at the same time. Or we could have many different views of different parts of the resource in the workspace at the same time. For example, I could pop this little section out into a quotation here, and I am going to turn on a visual helper for us. That's these transclusion bridges here, which show us when the same media is appearing in the workspace more than once, in more than one place at the same time. It's important to note that when I popped that out of there into this other copy here, that was not just a copy and paste, the same kind of dumb copy and paste that we've all been doing since the 1970s, where you make a selection, you say copy, and what the computer does is it takes the bytes of data that you selected and it duplicates them into some memory buffer, and maybe duplicates them out to a file. And in that process, where that data came from is completely discarded. It's lost, right? Here we are in the year 2025, and people are copying and pasting stuff from network resources all the time, and where that stuff came from is just flushed down the toilet in the process, which seems mind-blowing to me that that's the norm. And so that's not the norm in the Docuplextron here. When I select something from here, I can just copy it and paste it someplace. Like, let's make a new noodle here. And let's copy this text. And let's just paste it in here. All right. Here we have a perfect string match. This data has been duplicated over here, but where it came from has been discarded. As far as the software knows, I made that. I just wrote that myself. Isn't that amazing? Whereas we have a highlight between these two. That's because when I copied this and popped it out into a new composition, all I really copied was a reference to a fragment of a network media resource. And then when it popped up this new little floating item here, it said, pull in that network media resource and plug it in here, and remember where that came from. So we have this highlight here showing us that that is the same media in two places at the same time, whereas this doesn't have a highlight because it's a copy. It's an orphaning copy, a copy that separates the text from where it was copied from. So let's just get rid of this. We don't need that anymore. Because this little fragment of media here, this is a transclusion, and it knows what it's transcluding from. It knows that there's a source. If I put this away, I can right click on this and say, get the source media, and it'll bring it back, right? It'll give me a view of the entire source media. This too is a transclusion, but it's a transclusion of the entire source, whereas this is a transclusion of a fragment of the source. Because this knows what the source is and how much of the source we're looking at, we can do things like, whoops, wrong key. Enlarge the size of the quotation, right? One of a few keys on the keyboard here where we can go a character at a time and slurp in new text from the source. We can see that happening here if we get the source media and then just watch what the highlight is doing, the bridge is doing as we're doing this. You can see it slurps in more media from the source. We have another tool for that too. If you need to go in bigger chunks, you can say widen context, and you'll get a handy little slider here where you can, grab 100 words before and 100 words after and widen the window onto that quotation. And then you can also do this one with your keyboard too, and watch the size of the quotation shrink and grow as you go. Okay, so that's kind of a cool thing, and that'll come in handy a little bit later. But we can see that this transclusion knows its source. It knows how much of its source that we're looking at, and we can change the parameters of how much of the source that we're looking at. Let's talk about copying and pasting though again. So what we're looking at what we're looking at right now is we've got two compositions. We've got two documents, so to speak. The document on the right is one transclusion of the whole resource. The document on the left is one transclusion of a fraction of the resource. But we can, let's say we'll grab this paragraph and we'll do a copy, not of the bytes of text, but we'll do a copy of the reference to the text, and we'll paste it in at the end here. And now we have two transclusions in here, and we can do a third as well. Let's grab this paragraph. Copy by reference, paste by reference. And now, if I hold down the Alt key, I get a little selection box that tells me which transclusion I'm currently looking at, and I can switch between the three. And I can do things like move them around, but let's break for a second and talk about this form of document. If you go back to the very beginnings of the Xanadu literature, back in the 60s, Ted writes about how this is sort of the fundamental document type in this sort of system is a content list. It's just a list of stuff from around the network that's going to be pulled in and put together in a sequence, and that's going to be the document, because there's going to be this big pool of textual media, and some of it's going to be very preliminary. It's going to be notes, scraps, sketches, rough ideas, and some of it's going to be very polished, finished stuff. And when you're putting a document together, you're basically going to gather all these resources and put them together in a way that makes sense, that tells the story that you want it to tell. So the creation of documents isn't just going to be the act of writing. It's going to be selection, editing, sequencing stuff, list manipulation, essentially. At the time that I was writing the original version of the Docuplextron back in 2016, Ted had recently done a demo where he was showing off a viewer that could show you a xanalogical document format, these xanadocs, a plain text file that basically has a list of transclusions to make and some links, and the viewer would put that together for you and let you see the document and the connections. Of course, I had to implement that in the Docuplextron. So the Docuplextron does load xanadocs and xanalinks based on the circa 2014 xanadoc format that there are demonstration versions of online. Let's take a look at that sample xanadoc from 2016 and see what we can do with it in the Docuplextron. All right, here's the page on the Xanadu website where we can grab the sample Xanadoc right here. And this is what it looks like. This is the source of the document. And I can tell you what's going on here. The lines that say span are saying, go fetch this text resource, grab a substring of it, starting from the 25th code point, and grab 567 code points of this text resource. Put that on the top of the document, then grab this next one, and grab this next one, and just stack them up like I was doing with those, copy by reference and paste by references just a moment ago. The ones down at the bottom are links. If you watched the previous video where I was talking about how links can be things, logical entities separate from documents, it's the same kind of deal here. In fact, let's take a look at one of these. Oh wait, I don't want that whole thing. I just want the URL there. Oh, that's right. That one's not on the web anymore. There's a 404 on that one. There we go. And this is what the linking documents look like in this demonstration Xanadu viewer system here. There's a type, which is what we would call a relation, and then there are facets, which is what we would call nodes, but the difference here is that there can be more than two nodes, right? When we talk about links in the usual graph theory context, a link is two nodes and an edge. And in these linked documents, there can be multiple facets. How exactly those edges are connected depends on the type of link it is, I guess. I would characterize these xanalinks as they're like a linked data template. There's going to be some kind of structure or meaning that comes from the type that tells you what to do with all of these facets. So it's not just a link. But back to the sample ADL here. Let's load this up in the Docuplextron and see what it looks like. I'm going to grab this URL. Let's pop back over to here, and there's some little extra windows that pop up for the links that are being imported. The links work too, not just the document. And here we go. Here's how that EDL renders. This transclusion up here is the one that we saw on the top line. This next transclusion, here is the one that we see on the second line, and so on. There are, I think, 9 in this whole document. So we've got a content list of transclusions to pull in, put them together, and show them as a single document. We can do with these transclusions what you would expect to be able to do. We can say get the source media, and there we go. There's this plain text resource, and the bridges show us all the places where bits of text from this resource are being transcluded into the document. Obviously, it's not everything in here, so we can look at the other resources too, or other sources, let's say. Let's shrink that one a bit. This one is kind of a bigger document, and the transclusion coming from that one is way down a little ways. This one too. This one, at first glance, let's go over this way. You might think, oh, there's no bridge. It's not even transcluding. There is a bridge. It's just this is such a big document, and it's so far down in there that it's been pinched to a super small line. And whoops. Now we can see it's way down there at the bottom of this document. And then this one is the last source, I think. Yep. And we can see that there are those last two transclusions. Okay, let's talk about the different bridge viewing modes in here. We can turn them off, and when I'm using this software, most of the time I have the bridges turned off. They're useful when you need them, and then they're just kind of in the way when they're not, so you can turn them off. There's this first mode where you will only see a bridge for media fragments that you're hovering your pointer over, so that's pretty handy. That clears away a lot of the screen noise, and it can give you a nice little highlight showing you where something's coming from. There's this middle mode, which will show you all of the transclusions coming off of whatever item you're hovering over. So there are a bunch coming off of this one. There's only one coming off of this one. There are two coming off of that one. You get the idea. And then the last mode is all the transclusions all the time, which is a lot of screen noise that we don't necessarily need. All right, let's put some of these sources away because we don't really need to see everything. Oh, this little 404 is from one of the xanalinks. Remember the one we got a 404 in Firefox from just a moment ago? So it tried to load all the links. It failed on one of them, and we just have a little floating item saying that thing couldn't be loaded. So we'll put the rest of these away as well. And of course, if you want to, this quotation here, if we want to investigate, investigate the context of that link, we could of course open the source media and read everything around it. But remember what else we can do. We can redimension a transclusion in place by saying widen context. And we could open up our context window on this by 100 words and read all this other stuff. And then if we didn't want to keep it open, we could just say cancel and shrink back to its original size. So you can view original context in a separate document, or you can view it in the document that you're looking at by just widening the window. And with our little transclusion selector thing here, we can not just select transclusions, but we can move them around as well. Right? Take this one and move it up to the top of the stack, or maybe to the bottom of the stack. Grab this one and move it down to the bottom if we want to. So we can manipulate lists in that way. We can also slice these things up into smaller pieces. If we just wanted this headline here, or maybe this top header part to be cut in half, we can place our cursor there, slice it, and now we have a smaller chunk that we can move around if we want to. And of course we can make selections and delete things, like we could chop the word document off of here. And let's make another slice right there. The word document, we don't want it anymore. Poof, it's gone. But we could get it back by selecting this transclusion here and then extending the end of it a little bit until we have the word document back. Fun stuff. You could do a fun cut-up poem from sources all over the web and just do a line from one text, a line from another text, a line from another text. And it would be kind of fun to pick that apart and see where all these things were coming from, follow them back to their sources or widen their context windows. That's kind of a fun thing to do. Okay, so here we have a document that is a content list, but I'm not using Ted's Xanadoc format internally in the Docuplextron here. This has all been converted into xanalogical HTML. What makes HTML xanalogical? A custom tag, an xtext tag. There's a very rough spec for it on the Alf website, which is just a wrapper for text nodes that says what the network source is and what the substring is of it, and then the Docuplextron maintains these xtext nodes and pulls in their contents from the network when necessary. The advantage of using HTML over that Xanadoc format is that Xanadoc's structure is not a list, it's a tree, or you could think of it as lists of lists, nested lists. And that allows us to structure documents. It's also a semantic markup language, so we can semantically structure documents, and that makes it a little bit easier to style and format them, and also makes it easier for people who are accessing these documents with a screen reader or something like that to more correctly change the voicings of the parts that they're reading, or name or label the parts that they're reading. Let's talk about how we would make a structured document out of something like this, which is just a content list, which we could build ourselves by loading up text resources. And remember how I can make a selection and pop out a clipping from something? And then you can also make, you can copy things by reference and paste them into that composition. You can start building a document that way, but then you might want to structure this a little bit more. And I'll show you how this little highlight tool that I have here, it's not just for transclusions. This is something that allows us to navigate the tree structure of an HTML document, and I have a little sample document which will help us visualize this, how we can move things around and move between the things in an HTML composition. Now I have to remember where I put it. There it is. I don't know why that didn't work the first time. Anyway, this is just an HTML composition with some nested elements, some paragraphs inside of some sections inside of an article. When I hold down Alt, it highlights the element that I'm currently selecting. If I go left and right, it allows me to select the sibling elements of something. Alt-Shift left will select the parent element up the tree. Alt-Shift right will select the first child element of something, so we can go down the tree. In addition to selecting things, of course, we can move them around. You've seen me do this already. We can take paragraph 1 and move it around within its list of siblings, but we can also pop it outside of its container and move it down between things, and maybe move it into the second section. And we could even move it inside of that last paragraph, even though a paragraph inside of a paragraph doesn't really make a lot of semantic sense, but you get the idea. So that's how this, I call it the DOM cursor. That's how the DOM cursor works. It lets us grab stuff, move it around, and select different elements of the HTML structure. Another thing that we can do here is, if there is something that should be presented a certain way, like this transclusion right here is a quote, and it should be presented as a block quote because that's what it is. So let's go ahead and fire up our HTML palette here and say that that element that we just had selected should be put inside of a block quote. And there are several block quotes here. This one also is a block quote. This one is a block quote. And this one here is a block quote, and I moved things around so it's in the wrong place. So let's go ahead and dress it up properly, and then we'll move it back up here. I think that's where that one came from. Oh, actually, no, this one was the one that was down here, and this one is the one that, oh, no, it's, I don't remember the original structure of the document, but there we go. We've got quotes wrapped up as block quotes, and there are other things going on here too, like there are obviously sections. This, bit here, starting from links, is a section, so we could wrap that in a section element. Let's see if this works. That there, section, did it work? It did. So now that whole section we can move around if we want to, and then this bit here with sources, that should also be a section. I have a feeling that one's not going to work. Oops. It did work. Amazing. Sometimes the stuff that I make actually works the way that it's supposed to. This up here at the very top, that's supposed to be a level 1 heading, isn't it? So let's go ahead and make it a level 1 heading. There we go. This here should be a level 2 heading. And where, oh, this one here should be a level 2 heading. Boop. And let's say I like the link section at the bottom of the document instead. I can just move it around. So you get the idea. We can take something that's just a flat list of contents and then start nesting these contents into containers that can be presented differently, and they can be even styled. For example, if I wanted this heading up here to be in a monospace font, I can open up a little viewer on the style sheet properties for that. I can say font family, monospace, hit apply, and there we go. But I don't really want to do that, so let's dismiss that. What else? And of course, everything that we could do before, like I haven't broken anything. If I want to get the source media for this, it's still there. The transclusions have been chopped up into smaller pieces, well, that's the one where there's just one transclusion. We haven't really monkeyed with it very much, so that's all fine and dandy. But like this source here, you'll see that there are several little ribbons pointing to each of these individual transclusions because they have been, severed and put into different boxes. But it still all works. And in fact, if we, even though these transclusions are bucketed between element boundaries in the HTML, if I just grab this here and I do a copy, a xanalogical copy by reference, and I make a new document here and I paste it in. Let's put that away just to avoid the confusion here. This is all just one contiguous transclusion because, it reads the content addresses of all the things, of all the xtext elements, and if the numbers line up, if they're contiguous, then it'll just copy it as one contiguous reference. All right, what else? This is an HTML composition now. We would want to. We could publish this to a server, and let's publish the HTML to the server. On the Alf.io server, let's go into the temp thing, and that's the one I did last night. We'll call this one xanadoc2.html. Spell that right, I did. And we can put this resource out to the web now. Yes, please do. And there we go. Now it reloaded this and it collapsed the white space in here. And that's because when I load in a Xanadoc TED sample format, when the software sees that that's being loaded in, it sets the style on that element to respect the white space, because the expectation is that there are going to be carriage returns in there that need to be displayed as such. And when we export to HTML, that style tag gets lost, but we can just tell this thing, hey, respect the white space in this presentation so that we can see it the way that it looked before. Rather than having to set that manually, though, we can put that in the head of the document. If we edit the head of this HTML composition, we can put a little style guy in here that says, for the whole body, do the white space as pre-wrap. Close up the style tag. Let's apply that, dismiss it, and if we save our changes out to the server, it saves and then it does a refresh to make sure that everything's working the way that it's supposed to. Back in Firefox, if we go out to alf.io xpub temp, there's Xanadoc2, which we just published, and there it is. Now it's not a black background with light text because we didn't style any of that stuff. That's the default style in the Docuplextron, but out in your regular web browser, whatever the default style is, that's the one that's going to be applied. Now, you can publish a Xanadoc, or not a Xanadoc, you can publish one of these xanalogical HTML things with no text in it. By default, when we create a document in the Docuplextron and we publish it to the web, it has the text in it still, because the expectation is that everyone out there on the web is not going to have alf.js or any of that stuff installed so that the xtext element works and that the transclusions actually happen. But You can publish stuff out to the web that way with no text in it, just empty text elements. And when they get loaded into the Docuplextron, it'll see those elements and fill their contents automatically. In fact, we can prove that here. If we go back and we go inside of this transclusion element and we grab the text node that's in there and just nuke it. And we'll do that here too. This quotation, let's go inside of the transclusion, take the text out of it, and this will take a minute, but let's do everything. We'll leave a few at the end there, but there are all those transclusions that have been emptied out now. If we take a look at the code for this, you can see the whole top of the document it doesn't have line breaks in it, but it's just one xtext element after another. And each one of these is a transclusion. And if we save this out to the web, what's going to happen is I'm going to hit Save Changes here, and it's going to magically refill all of the text contents of this, at least it should. Yes. Because it always does a reload after a save. And when it does a load of one of these xanalogical HTML documents, it fills all the contents automatically. If we go back out to Firefox, though, and we reload this page, it's a mostly empty document because we don't have the transclusion stuff loaded in here as a web extension. So you can publish empty HTML documents that just have a bunch of xtexts in them and get the same thing as one of those Xanadocs where it just says slurp in this media and put it in there. What else? Let's talk about the links. Remember when we loaded this document in, there were a couple little floating windows saying that links were being loaded too, because they're in the ADL. Now this one we got a 404 on, so that one didn't work, but the other three links do work. And let's take a look at those. When you load in this Xanadoc and it loads in those Xanalinks, it puts them in the session graph. In the last video I mentioned that that's a temporary graph. It gets wiped out every time you restart the browser. But they're in there. I just don't have them turned on right now. But let's turn them on. Let's see the session graph links. And you can see them down here. This little bit of text has a link to this little quotation. And this one has a link to this little quotation. And this one has a link to this little quote. Now, the thing that it's linked to here is a fragment of media, which has just been shown as a transclusion of that fragment of media. If we want to see the rest of this text, we can say get source media and see where see where that came from. We could do that. You'll notice that the link pointer, did I explain this in the last video? I'm not sure I did. We've got this link line coming from this node out to this node, which then forks. It's because the same endpoint is in the workspace in two places at the same time. And so when that happens, this will fork out as many times as it needs to. If there are a bunch of different instances of the same text, we can make it go 3 ways here as well if we want to. Which gets a little bit messy to look at. The handy thing is it does highlight all the same stuff when you hover your mouse over that. But that's kind of a messy way to look at it. But remember, we can always do this. We can always say, widen the context on this. Give me a slightly bigger window on what I'm looking at here. That's the endpoint of the link. That's a chunk of the article. And if we don't want to keep all of that open, we can just cancel it. It'll shrink it back to just the bit that we're concerned with. Same thing here, right? Let's widen the context on this. This one's not a very big document, so we can just grab the whole thing. And okay, there's a link to that particular piece of this small document, which itself is a quotation of something that Ted wrote a long time ago. Let's demonstrate the advantage of transclusion plus xanalogical linking, where you've got, your document is a composition of network media fragments. You've got this pool of stable media down here, in this case plain text, And then you've got these links, these logical entities floating over the top. When you've got links that work that way, where the browser is just aware of the connections, anytime media that has been linked to comes into the workspace, the browser is going to overlay those links onto it. And let's give a good example of that. Let's put away this xanadoc and put that away too, because that's not even open anymore. Hypothetical situation. You are feeling like you want to read some classics. It's the great American novel, and you find a copy of Moby Dick online. I can type, really I can. Moby Dick, nope, table of contents. There we go. And you find this fairly vanilla looking copy of Moby Dick, and you decide that you're going to read it. You jump into chapter 1 and you read a bit, and immediately you're struck by how great this first paragraph. The first paragraph is really good. This part in particular here. Whenever I find myself growing grim about the mouth, if you know the book, you know how good this is, then I count it high time to get to see as soon as I can. And you decide you want to make a note about that. You're going to make an annotation of this. So let's make a new graph, and we'll call this ND Anno Moby Dick Annotations. And let's go ahead and annotate that. Whenever I find blah, 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 high time to get to see as soon as I can. Link a note, and we'll just say based, right? Not a word I ever use, but I thought it would be funny. There we go. We've made ourselves a little note about that. And then we continue reading the remainder of the text. And anytime we revisit this, we'll see our little note that we left ourselves here, and we'll open it up and we'll say, oh yeah, I thought that was pretty based the first time that I read it. All right, let's put this away. You're cruising around the web. You come across a new copy of Moby Dick. That's pretty interesting to look at. I don't think I'll be able to remember the URL for this one. Demo materials. I'll just have to. What? Oh, that doesn't even exist. Oh, you know what? I can just look in here. There it is. Demo material. Moby Dick, and let's start from the table of contents. You find this other edition of Moby Dick online, and it's a beautiful edition with the Rockwell Kent illustrations that are so nice to look at. And you go, oh yeah, I never finished reading Moby Dick. Well, let me refresh my memory. I'll just skim these early chapters so that I can enjoy the illustrations. And you open up chapter 1, and you're looking through it, and oh, what's this here? What is that? Let's turn the session graph off because it's in the way. There we go. What's that there? There's a link at that passage that I liked. Oh, it's that note that I wrote, because these two different editions of Moby Dick are transcluding the text from the same source. There could be an infinite number of editions, of presentations of Moby Dick with illustrations from different illustrators and different typography and different color schemes and all that stuff. Some of them could be broken into chapters, and some of them could just be super long scrolls of the whole book, which sounds like a nightmare to me. Because the link that you made points at the source text, and all of these other presentations of the book are transcluding from that source text. Anytime you see a presentation of this book, and your links are loaded into your workspace, your links will be overlaid onto those presentations of the book. That's how the system works. That's how, that's the Xanadu style way to do things, with persistent links that point through document presentations at the underlying source media. So that's cool, I think. This is one way in which we can represent media in a bunch of different ways without, if you made an annotation of a copy of Moby Dick that you found online right now, whatever mechanism you used for doing that, if you used some sort of online annotation service, it would cache a copy of that document, and it might embed your link into it, or it might use some kind of clever pointer scheme to, make a reference between the annotation that you write and that particular part of the thing that you're annotating, but your annotation would only apply to that particular copy of that. And there are 1,000 copies of Moby Dick floating around on the internet right now. Wouldn't it be nice if they all transcluded from one source so that you could share your annotations of Moby Dick with anybody else that you wanted to, and any edition of Moby Dick they chose to look at would work? Your links, your links and your annotations would work for that. Wouldn't that be great? Yes, it would be great. There's no debate. That's my authoritative answer. Yes, that would be great. Now that I've got this open, let's talk about one other thing, one other feature of the system. And that is what I'm doing with metadata on the back end of this. Because you'll notice, remember when I said in the intro here, wouldn't it be great if you could just hover your pointer over something and see where it came from and who made it? Well, if we look at the info box on the bottom of the screen down here in the lower right corner, as my pointer is hovering over this text, it's telling me that's Herman Melville, and that's text from Moby Dick, or The Whale. When I move my pointer up to this illustration here, it's telling me that that's Rockwell Kent. And that's an illustration that I did from Moby Dick Chapter 1. The title of the chapter is Loomings. Wouldn't it be great if that facility were there for everything that got published on the web? I think that would be fantastic, because we wouldn't have all of these orphan works floating around all over the place. And the way that we do that in ALF, the way that I do that in ALF is on the server. When you publish something to the ALF server, it's available in two forms, right? You can send a usual HTTP GET request to it, and you'll get the media payload of the thing, right? If it's a plain text, you'll get the plain text. But in the HTTP headers, all of the resources advertise themselves as linked data platform resources. What you can do with LDPRs is if you send a GET request, but you set the accept header to one of a number of different acceptable RDF serializations. The one that I'm most interested in using is JSON LD. So you set the accept header to accept application /LD plus JSON. You won't get the media, you won't get the text or the image or whatever it is. You'll get a document full of metadata, full of linked data. And we can see what kind of data is in there by right-clicking on this resource and saying, give me the source info on this. What information do we have about that image? We have information about the author. We have a name for it. And then we have a little bit of data about the resource itself, how big it is in pixels, and the media type, and of course the context for the JSON LD document. That stuff's not super interesting, but that's where this information about authorship and the title of the work is coming from. If we look at something else, if we look at something on my little media repository for my illustrations and stuff, if we pull up this animation of a guy, a familiar looking guy at a desk, and this animated tentacle thing going on, you'll see down in the lower right corner that as my pointer is hovering over that, it's saying Adam Moore, Lemire, that's me. Tentacle Guy is the name of the work, but there's more information too. If we check the source info on this, it doesn't just tell us the author, it tells us the copyright holder, which isn't always the same thing. In this case it is. Also a description about what we're looking at. This description can easily be plugged by the server into alt text for images. So it's always good to have descriptions of things. There's also a link to the license for this image. That would be nice to have on everything that's floating around out there on the web. And then the name of the resource and yada, yada. Uploading stuff to your media repository, if you have an ALF server, is pretty straightforward. I mean, I showed in the last video how you can, well, I showed in this one too, how you can publish HTML to the web, and plain text resources and images or whatever. If you go up to the repository browser here, you can upload files from your file system to your server. Let's do this. Let's create, whoops. There we go. Let's create a noodle. This is some plain text I'm going to publish for a demo, and then edit its capital L linked data representation. All right, so right now, when I'm hovering my pointer over this, you see that it says undefined and then the internal noodle name, the resource ID for this bit of text that lives in the browser. The undefined comes from the fact that this doesn't have a title. If we title this foo, then when I hover my pointer over it, it'll say that this is foo. This is the noodle called foo. But we don't want it to be a local resource anymore. Let's publish this out to the web. Publish text to server, and we'll put this in the usual destination, the temp folder, and let's get rid of most of this stuff. We'll leave the timestamp though, just to prove that we just did this right now. Of course, you don't know what time I'm recording this. You'll have to take you will in a moment. And let's call it demo text 3. These other ones are from other various run-throughs that I've tried to do of this. Put and change all the links. Sure. Delete the noodle. Sure. I don't need the internal copy of that anymore. All right. Now, right, this has changed from a transclusion of an internal resource to a transclusion of a network resource. And when I hover my pointer over it, it tells me Adam C. Moore. Well, how does it know that I'm the author? Because I have the server set up so that everything that I publish out there has my name attached to it in the linked data representation. By default, we can override that, but that's the way that I've got my server set up. But it doesn't have a name or anything like that. It doesn't have any other additional information about this. But we can change that. Let's take a look at the source info. And there's my name. I could change that. I could say that the author was somebody else if I wanted to. Like this Moby Dick stuff over on the screen here, that's hosted on alf.io, and I told it who the author was, not me. But we can add new properties like a name. Let's give this a name, and let's say test thingy in caps, because that's fun. And we'll send that out to the server, and now that's in the linked data representation. We could also add a description to this if we wanted to. Just some text for a demo. Nothing fancy. Send that out there, and now that's in the linked data representation too. All right, let's put this away. And because metadata requests are throttled in here, it's probably not actually updated in the metadata cache in the Docuplextron yet. No, not yet. So when I hover my pointer over that, it's going to show you my name, but it doesn't show you the title yet. Let's ask for source info again and see if we can get a fresh copy. There it is. So it pulled that off the server, and now when I float over this, it'll say the name of this is test thingy. And if I look at the source info, it's going to have that, the description that I put on there, just some text for a demo, nothing fancy. Okay, so anytime you publish text or publish an image or a video or whatever to your ALF server, you can just use this tool to update its metadata very easily. And then anybody else who, this is the only thing that looks at it right now, anybody else who opens that media up in their Docuplextron will be able to see the author and the name of the piece and investigate its description, its license, whatever other stuff that you have in the linked data representation. Okay, one last thing that we'll show in this video, and that is, remember when I said in the beginning, wouldn't it be great if you could just right click on something and say, where have you been published and what links to you? Well, let's transclude this text right now. And let's see how that information becomes available. So right now, this is just a little plain text resource on the alf.io server. If I right click on this and I say get known links, it's going to pull up this little window that says nothing, right? There are no transcluding documents. There are no linking documents. This is, nobody knows about this piece of text, obviously, because I just published it, right? Let's do this. Let's create a new composition, a new HTML composition, and rather than writing something in there, I'm going to quote this. Just the word plain text. Why not? copy by reference, xanalogical copy. I'm not just copying and pasting the text, I'm copying and pasting a reference to the text so that we get a transclusion in here. Did that work? It may have crashed or hung up. Oh, nope, there it goes. That was very slow. I wonder why. And if we take a look at the HTML of this, right, it's just an empty HTML document with a paragraph and one X text in it with the word plain text in it. Nothing too fancy, but let's close that. And this is just an HTML fragment in the Docuplextron right now. If we close the software and open it back up, that'll still be there because it's stored in the workspace. But let's publish it out to the web. Let's put it out in the old temp directory again, and we'll call this HTML test.html. Sure. Yep, put that out there, and there we go. We now have an HTML document that just has the word plain text in it, but it's transcluding that text from this resource that we created over here. And there's our little transclusion bridge to show us that that's what's happening. If we go over into our web browser and go to xpub.temp, where is it? HTML test. There it is. It's just this very simple document that says plain text out there. Whoops. But now, if I right-click on this resource and I say get known links, we have some, oh, it didn't work. Why didn't it work? Are you sure that didn't work? Get known links, no transcluding documents. Well, that's funny. Let's make this a bigger transclusion. It shouldn't matter, but let's make it a bigger transclusion and see if anything changes. There. Okay. Save changes to server. Sure. Get known links. There we go. Well, that's weird that it didn't work the first time. But now, I guess it took a moment for the server to process the little query that we sent it. I've published an HTML document that was transcluding from an ELF server resource. And the Docuplextron looks at the HTML documents that you're publishing. It looks at the metadata cache to see if any of those are coming from an ELF server. And if they are coming from an ELF server, it sends a little query to that ELF server and says, hey, somebody's publishing an HTML document that transcludes one of your resources. You might want to check it out. And then the server goes, the server says, oh, okay, I'll check that out. And then it grabs whatever that document is and it looks for transclusions or links to itself. And if it finds any, it keeps a record of them. That way you can query that resource about what's linking to it and what's transcluding from it. So now we have in this little bit of information, it says, hey, this document here, xpub temp HTML test.html has a transcluding element that transcludes this chunk of this resource. And if all of this stuff was put away, whoops, yeah, we could just follow that link and open it up. And sure enough, there's that HTML document. It works for old-fashioned hyperlinks too. This thing here, let's make a link to the source itself, which is a little bit confusing. Let's grab the URL here, copy that link. Let's make a hyperlink on publish. Going to that. Whatever. Okay. All right. Now we've got a hyperlink in this HTML fragment. We're going to publish that back out to the server. Save changes. Okay. Yeah, that's been reloaded. And now that I've published that, the same thing has happened. The Docuplextron has said, oh, I'd better tell this resource that it's being linked to in this document. And so now when we right-click on this resource and we say, get known, well, we can just refresh this actually. There we go. Oh, it's got extra information. Transcluding documents 3. Right, that makes sense. So because I put that hyperlink in there, what it did is that one transclusion got broken into 3 transclusions. And so it rescanned the document, and it says so there are actually 3 transclusions in here of this chunk of text, this chunk of text, and this chunk of text. And then also there's a jump link, a hyperlink, that points to the resource in this document, which we just edited. Eventually, a network gets built of media resources that know of their connections to other media resources in the network. Are there problems with this? Sure, I'm sure it could be abused to all heck. But hey, nobody's using the system, and it's just kind of a proof of concept thing right now. Anyway, the principle is there, that it's relatively easy to construct a system that does this kind of, what am I trying to say? Record keeping about its place in the universe, its situatedness in the hypertext universe. Okay, was there anything else that I wanted to show in this demo? Boy, I'm looking at the counter on this video up here, and it's saying this is almost an hour. Hopefully it'll trim down a bit. But let's call this one done.